two or three things. He went up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was sort of on a mountaintop in high country, so this is in terms of altitude, not in terms of direction. He was actually going south from Cana, but he was going up. He was going up to the mountains. Cana would have been down lower, and he was going up. John repeatedly is going to tell us in contradistinction to the other synoptic gospels. John is going to tell us about which festival was going on. There's a reason for that. He's writing at the latter part of the century. He's writing to Gentiles who would not have been familiar with Jewish holidays, with Jewish festivals. And so he's telling his audience, this was the Passover. I switched doctors the other day. Got the same doctor my wife has. Complain about her now. Maybe she'll eat it. But the doctor's Jewish. I had an appointment on following appointment this fall in October on the 17th. She said, I can't come on the 17th. And I said, why not? She said, well, it's a holiday. I said, well, which holiday? She said, well, you call it Succoth, or we call it Succoth, and you call it the Feast of the Tabernacles. And I said, oh, yeah. So she moved it to another day in October. But so, lo and behold, now he's telling us, do what? Probably. They usually build them in their backyard. She lives in Chicago, so a lot of times these days they'll build not a tent per se, but it's just a little cheapo structure they throw together, and they have a dinner outside. I don't know whether they sleep out there or not, but a lot of especially the Orthodox Jews will actually do whatever they're supposed to do on Sukkot. So, he mentions in the course of John, I think I told you last week, the Gospel of John is how we know that the ministry of Jesus took 3 years. Because he mentions 3 Passovers. He mentions this one, he mentions another one in John 6, and mentions another one in chapter 11 in verse 55. Of course, the last one, 11:55, is the only one that is specifically mentioned in the Synoptic Gospel. This was probably AD 28 when this occurred. At least that's a reasonable suggestion. And he had been trained since his youth in Luke 2, verse 41, to go to the Passover, to go up to Jerusalem for these holidays. He found in the temple, who was it? Alan's been telling us about the sacrifices. People who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and money changers sitting at their tables. The oxen, the sheep, and the pigeons were principally used in sacrificial worship at the temple. You ever wondered why did they sacrifice pigeons and doves? Why didn't they sacrifice chickens? This is a trick question. No, they didn't have chicken. Chickens are a Asian product. India, the Southeast Asia, they're jungle animals, actually, and they have been imported when the Europeans began taking over in Europe. And so we find them in the New Testament as they began to be imported. Alexander the Great, remember? All those conquests all the way into India, that stuff began flowing backwards, including chicken. And so there's a cock that will crow to, in the case of Peter, and Jesus can talk about a hen gathering her chickens under her wings. But in the Old Testament, they didn't have chickens. There's no mention of them. Go ahead, look. There's no mention of them in the Old Testament at all. So I think they mentions buzzards and eagles quite a bit, but there's no mention of chickens. And so they sacrificed doves and ate doves and ate pigeons. There's a fellow up near me. There are a lot of people that eat pigeons. Any of you known of them? Squab, you eat squab? Not a lot of meat, but okay, pretty good. If you've got a husband or somebody, if you've hunted before, you hunt for quail or pheasant. Pigeon is about the same, only it can be kept as a tame animal. And I've known of several Christians who did raise and eat squab. So anyway, they had these animals, and it was a convenience to the people. You know, these people would come long distances to worship and offer sacrifice there in Jerusalem, so it was convenience. If you're setting sail from Spain to go attend the Passover, you're not going to drag that ox with you. It's just too much trouble. You buy one when you get there. So they would set up stalls in the outer court. In the New Testament, it would be called usually the court of the women. And took up a lot of room, a lot of animals. When the Passover occurred, there were probably as many as between 500,000 to 1 million sacrifices. Alan was commenting about the blood that would have been just pouring out of these animals and the offal that was coming out of them. So they would be washing all of that. He commented, I think, Sunday or Sunday before, that the temple there in Jerusalem in the New Testament had an extensive underground plumbing system to get rid of all that junk. And so anyway, they would buy it when they got there. They probably were not there all the time. They probably were only there for the major holidays in sort of temporary stalls. Very difficult to say exactly, but probably not there all the time. The word that it says changers of money sitting, the money changers. The actual word there is referring to a dealer in small coins. And so he would, yes. Yeah. They brought good animals. Yeah. They would have had to been. This was an agrarian economy. They they raised these, and of course many of the poor people were sacrificing the doves or the pigeons, and the wealthier people would be sacrificing the sheep and the oxen and so forth. Sort of graduation. Not everybody sacrificed sheep. They couldn't afford it. Not everybody sacrificed an ox. Oh, yeah. They still do, by the way. If you've ever traveled to another country, they still do. Well, what do you think? Yeah. Licensing fees, rental space. The reason for the money changers was that they would have to make a donation in the temple of a half shekel. And the half shekel could only be in the Tyrian half shekel, which was considered to be the purest silver available. So no matter what money you brought, you had to go to the money changers who would weigh your money. People had, you file that gold coin down or save the filings. So they would weigh your money and give you in exchange the half shekel. And usually two people would go together and they would bargain for a full shekel, and the two of them would share that. They had to give it was a temple tax. They had to give that. And the money changers would charge about 12.5%. So fairly healthy exchange rate there. No. No, that's what they said. But their currency was metal-based, and so they didn't have any governments guaranteeing the value of that coin. So it was all based on the weight of your metal. So they'd have a scale there and weigh out your coin, or coins. No, they wouldn't do that. Just like nobody would forge or nobody would counterfeit those $50 bills, would they? Go ahead, Bill. No. Yes. Well, they could have done it outside the temple grounds, but this was kind of convenient. That's why they did it. And like I say, probably there was a rental to the money changers and a fee to the guys selling these animals. It was paid to the priest or somebody. So roughly, this would be set up roughly about 20 days before the Passover, and they're making their money out of it. Now, Jesus made a scourge of small cords and drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overthrew the tables. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal, he ran them out. But think about how many animals that is. Have you ever seen what happens, when a cattle truck overturns out on 465, and suddenly all those pigs or goats or sheep or cows start scattering out? This is a whole lot more than that. They'd be going everywhere. And he ran them out, and they would have gone everywhere in the vicinity. Somebody'd have to go round them up. The scourge was to drive the animal. They might need a little encouraging. He wasn't whipping the people, but he would have been driving these animals out, which this would have made quite a stir in town, and so they're going to take notice of this. This is probably, I want to look at some other passages with you. This is probably harking back to some Old Testament passages. For instance, in Malachi 3 and verse 1, I'll send my messenger, he shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek shall suddenly come to his temple. Even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. He shall suddenly come to his temple. Now you tie that, let me see. Yeah. Read on a little bit further. Who may abide the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire and fuller's soap. He shall sit at Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. So he was going to come to his temple, and there would be a purification of the temple. You might also notice the book of Zechariah, the 14th chapter. And this is a lengthy reading. I don't want to read it all. He talks about all the nations that were gathering against Jerusalem. In verse 4, he says, His feet shall stand at that day on the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the west. And I'm not going to read this whole section. I want you to go down with me that where it's in verse 16. It shall come to pass that everyone is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whosoever will not come of all the families of the earth, he's talking about the gospel going to all the nations, unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even unto them shall be no rain. Egypt was going to come up, and if they didn't come, they were going to be punished. In that day shall there be, in verse 20, in that day shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls from the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts. And all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them and seethe therein. Alan's been talking about some of these sacrifices were seething parts of the animal. That day there shall be no more of the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. So you have these Old Testament prophecies saying that the Lord was going to purify the temple. He was going to come to the temple and purify things. Now, this is a case of prophetic symbolism, if you will. It's not actually a prophecy. Well, excuse me, it is a prophecy, but it's not predictive necessarily of the Messiah. And I want to do some more studying with you about that. And in the next few passages, we're going to look at some passages that talk about that. Zechariah 14:21 is not necessarily a prediction of what Jesus was going to do, but it is something perhaps maybe he had in his mind, where they were turning the Lord's house into a supermarket outside. The preceding verses are talking about how all nations will go up to Jerusalem to worship, and the only place all nations were going to come. Now, in the temple, the only place that all nations could come was in that outer court. And therefore, if it's taken up with all these animals and so forth, the court of the Gentiles, in that area, it couldn't be used for worship, as Rita was saying. So Jesus' action was reinforcing his spoken protest. All nations couldn't come there outside the temple. His disciples remembered that the scripture says, Zeal for your house hath eaten me up. I believe, let me get back here. Hath eaten me up. The Revised Version worded it just a little bit differently. He says, take these things hence, make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. His disciples remembered that it was written, the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Now that passage is from Psalm 69 and verse 9. This clause is quoted twice, or this passage is quoted twice in the New Testament. It's quoted here. It's also quoted in Romans, the 15th chapter, at least the second half of the clause is quoted in Romans 15 and verse 3. Even Christ pleased not himself, but as is written, the reproaches of them that reproach thee fell on me. In that instance, which is the second half of Isaiah 69:9. Now, this passage, let's go back there, and I think I can show you. This passage is not messianic. It seems, and I want to do some more study with you, and then maybe in the coming weeks, if the Lord wills, I'll quit traveling and we quit having meetings. The passage is 69:9. The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproach thee are fallen on me. But go back a little bit in that chapter, and verse 5. O God, thou knowest my foolishness, and my sins are not hid from thee. So this is a Davidic psalm. He's talking about himself. But it is prophetic in the sense that the disciples and Jesus saw that the same thing was happening in the New Testament. It wasn't a prophecy of the Messiah, but it was the same thing that David was writing about. So that David said, the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Jesus said, I feel the same way. That's the sort of thing, that's the use he's making of this verse. So it's a prophecy, if you will, or prophetic, but it's not predictive. He's not predicting, hey, Jesus is going to say this in either passage, and it's the same thing applies to Romans 15:3. That is not prophetic in the sense of being predictive. It is the Lord and the apostles are simply making use of an Old Testament statement and saying, yes, this is what David said and how he felt. This same sort of thing is applicable to Jesus. If you can wrap your head around that, and I may multiply those, several of these New Testament quotations are like that. They're not really prediction. Now, a lot of them are predictions, but a lot of them are not. They are simply situations where it was a reminder. And you'll do the same thing today. You'll read passages that apply to Paul and Peter, maybe even Jesus, and you'll apply them to yourself. You know, for instance, Romans 7, where Paul talks about the conflict that he's having between what he wants to do as the inner man and what he wanted to do spiritually. And he says that, you know, there was a conflict there. You might make the same sort of statement yourself. You have that conflict in yourself. All right, I can beat that dead horse to death, but I'll wait for another day to beat him a little bit more. If you're up with me. No. Jesus said he was going to come in the spirit and power of Isaiah or of Elijah, and but the prediction is definitely made. There was going to be a messenger. He was that messenger. He was the Elijah that was for to come, and Jesus does say that. But it was a spiritual rebirth, if you will, of Elijah, as opposed to they were expecting Elijah to actually come back. So this psalm, Isaiah 69, quoted in both passages, is not a messianic psalm. So to get back here, okay. Then answered the Jews, and this should be in bold. What sign showest thou us, seeing thou doest these things? So what's going on? Because you can imagine the hullabaloo that would have been aroused by driving all these animals out of the temple, upsetting there's money scattered all over from the money changers' tables, and everybody's running, running for their lives and trying to round up their cows. What signs show us? Have you got a paper that says you can do this, or have you got a search warrant or that sort of thing? Now, I've mentioned these other passages. In terms of the signs that they had seen, they probably were beginning to grasp what was going on. Nicodemus did. Nicodemus says, "We know you're a teacher come from God. No man can do the things thou doest except God be with you." We're going to see that in the next chapter. Well, where did Nicodemus learn all that? Well, they knew something was going on. They knew there were some signs, but they were sort of fighting against it just a little bit. Look with me in John 6. Oh, I can get over it. John 6 and verse 26. He says here, Jesus answered them and said, when they found him on the, they said, "Rabbi, why did you come here?" And he says, "Verily I say unto thee, ye seek me not because you saw the miracle, but because you did eat of the loaves and were filled." So they weren't able to completely grasp the truth of the signs. And these men undoubtedly were seeing in what he had done, what they knew he had done. They knew something of the signs, but they weren't really fully latched onto them yet. Jesus answered and said unto them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Now think about that just a little bit. This is an amazing sort of statement. I'll declare. Lost part of my note. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. When therefore he was risen from the dead, his disciples didn't get it either until he was risen from the dead. His disciples remembered that he had said this unto them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Now, the temple wasn't built at this time. It wasn't finished. It wasn't finished for 40 more years. The temple was finished about 69 AD, right before it was torn down. So it was actually 86 years in building. It wasn't just 46 years, it was 86 years in building. But they're talking about, hey, this is where we are now. This is when he started it, and this is where we are now. It was a magnificent building. Well, the disciples were wondering about the same thing. Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. He says as much about the parables in Matthew 13:10. The disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? He answered and said, Because it's given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it's not given. Whomsoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. Whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. You know, I preached the other day about the laborers in the vineyard. Did I? Yeah. It wasn't the other day, it's been a little further back. Uh, who killed the son of the owner. Finally, they killed prophets who had been sent to him, and so forth. And that was probably the most obvious parable Jesus said. And it was so obvious to the Jews that he was addressing that to them and claiming himself to be the son of the master, that parable finally convinced them. They'd been plotting it, but that finally convinced them, we've got to do this. But yeah, he wouldn't stay there. He wouldn't stay in Judea because of the threat. He would come for some of these, and even others would comment as time went on. Why don't his brothers chided him and said, "Well, if you're really the Messiah, go on down to Jerusalem and declare it." And he would be coming and going and not staying there because you're right, it would enrage them. Well, as he speaks of it, he says his hour wasn't come. That's what he said to his mother here in John 2. He says, mine hour is not come. It's not time yet. And he says that several times. Some of that telling people not to talk about his miracles was an attempt to give him some freedom of movement. You know, you think about the Hollywood celebrities. Yeah, where every move is surrounded by paparazzi and people wanting to get a look at them and all that sort of thing. And so you lose your independence, your freedom. The Queen of England and her sons, they can't just go, I believe I'll go down to McDonald's and have a burger. They can't do that. Yeah. The hard part about a parable is putting yourself at the proper place. For instance, the parable of the sower. The parable of the sower is actually fairly easy to understand. He explains it. It's fairly easy to understand, but it's still a hard parable. Why? Because we all want to be, I'm the good ground. We don't want to admit I was among the thorns. I was over on that path, had no nourishment. I was in the stony ground. It's where you're going to put yourself. Where are you really in that parable? So, anyway, let's finish this second chapter. In the feast day, on the Passover, many believed in his name when they saw the miracle. So there's other stuff going on. This wasn't just it. But Jesus did not commit himself unto them because he knew all men. You know, you can't, apparently the idea, you couldn't just drop it all of them at once. They would be incensed. They couldn't accept it. It takes a while. That's why in our children's Bible classes, they sort of have to work up to these things. They have to see the Old Testament's faith, really. And so we tell them about David. We tell them about Daniel in the lion's den. We tell them about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And all those Bible examples. And they're working up to it. And God loved you so much. Jesus loved you so much. He died for you. You got to work up to that to understand what it is to really love and what it is to really have faith. You can't just suddenly, boom, here it is. In fact, in the case of the apostles, they really don't believe until Caesarea Philippi, up there in the mountain. And the Lord, the Bible says, the Lord had to reveal it to Peter. Who do you say I am? And finally, Peter says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Other men say different. And then he says, flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. So even the disciples, they're not really convinced until Caesarea Philippi, which is about 2 years into this. So here they are early. They've seen these miracles, a lot of them at this point. And so Jesus is not committing everything. And he needed not. And then he should testify. For he knew what was in man. And we're going to see example after example of that. For instance, Nicodemus comes to him in the next chapter. He knew about Nicodemus. He knew what was in his heart and mind. And he doesn't waste the interview with Nicodemus and so many of these people is so profound in that he doesn't waste a lot of time palavering with Nicodemus. He goes straight to the heart of the thing. And he does that several times. He does it with the woman of Sychar. He does it with the folks at Bethesda, the man at Bethesda, where he goes immediately to the root of the problem. Is it your problem is ingratitude? You saw what you've seen what he does with the rich young ruler. Boom! It was immediate. You know, go and sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you'll be perfect. You want to be perfect? Here it is. Whew. Well, he didn't want to really be perfect. Okay, we'll go to the 3rd chapter next week. Thank you for your attention. Jesus, they were probably in the court of the Gentiles. That'd be the biggest open area there in the court of Herod. Maybe in the court of the women.